Hey everyone, I'm Jake, and in this tutorial I'll show you how to set up a simple shooting system in Unity 2D. For this I'm using a top-down shooter asset pack which I'll leave linked in the description below. Firstly, create an empty game object and name it player, reset its transforms and create a sprite as a child of the player object, using a sprite of your own choice. Next we'll add a rigid body 2D, set the gravity scale to 0 and under the constraints tab freeze the Z rotation as we'll want to rotate the player through code. Then in the asset panel, create a script called player movement and open it up in your code editor. Remove the start function and create a public float for the move speed, a public reference to the rigid body 2D and a private vector for the movement, which we'll use to get input from the player. In update, we'll set the X movement to input.getAxis raw horizontal and the Y movement to input.getAxis raw vertical. These input axes are by default set to the arrow and WASD keys. In fixed update, we'll call the rigid body's move position function, passing in the current position with the movement vector multiplied by move speed and time.delta time. Back in Unity, add the movement script to the player, drag the rigid body component into the slot on the script and set the move speed. Now we've got the player moving. Next up, we'll get the player aiming towards the mouse. Back in the player movement script, create a public reference to the camera and a vector for the mouse position. In update, we'll set the mouse pos vector to the cursor's position using screen to world point. And now with that information, we'll be able to rotate the player. Create a vector 2 called direction. For this, we'll get the distance between the mouse and the player, and then get the angle we'll need to rotate and simply set the rigid body's rotation to that angle. Save the script and jump into play mode, and now the player is rotating to face the mouse cursor. Alright, with that set up, let's get the player shooting. Back in Unity, create an empty game object as a child of the player and call it shot point, then move it to be positioned at the end of the gun. Create an empty game object named bullet, and add a sprite as the child. We'll add a rigid body 2D and set the gravity scale to 0, as well as a circle collider 2D. Drag the bullet game object into the asset panel to create a prefab and delete it from the scene. We'll now create a script called shooting and add that script to the player and open it up. We'll need a few variables for this one, a public transform for the shot point, a public game object for the bullet, and a float for the bullet force, which will essentially be the bullet speed. In update, we'll check if the player is pressing down the left mouse button, and if they are, we'll call our shoot function. In our shoot function, we'll instantiate the bullet prefab at the shot point's position and rotation. We'll create a temporary rigid body variable and set it to the component on the bullet we've just instantiated. We'll then add a force to it to make it move. Back in Unity, on the player's shooting script, we'll drag in the shot point transform and the bullet prefab onto the script, as well as set the bullet's force. Lastly, we'll create a script for the bullet. For the sake of the tutorial, this one will just destroy the bullet when it collides with something, but here you could spawn bullet impact effects or deal damage to enemies. And just like that, the player can now shoot towards the mouse. Although currently, the player will only fire with each click of the mouse. Let's modify our code so the player can hold down the mouse button instead. Back in our shooting script, we'll create a public float for the time between shots and a private float for the shot counter. In update, we'll count down the shot counter by time.delta time, and then check if that shot counter is less than or equal to 0. If it is, the player will be able to shoot. We'll then reset the shot counter to the time between shots value. Lastly, we'll change the input check from get button down to get button. Save the script, jump back into Unity and set the time between shots value in the inspector. Press play and try it out. That's so much better. But that's all for this video. If you enjoyed, be sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.